Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, and friends, family, ladies, gentlemen, the time has finally come. It's NFL Week 1. We put the preseason in the rear view. All of the preview podcasts that you guys have listened to in record numbers around these parts, those are things of the past, and we start talking about meaningful football. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, an NFL superfan, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I know every single week during the fall, you begrudgingly do college football to appease me on Wednesdays, but this is your baby. This is what you live for, the National Football League.
I'm starting to love college football just for you.
That's a lie. That's a lie, but this being the longest relationship you've no doubt been a part of, I'm glad that you're trying to meet me in the middle ground, so I really appreciate that. It does mean the world to me.
What a guy. What a guy I am. Yes, NFL Week 1. We are officially at the point where you can say, pump the brakes just a little bit, that these lines have been out all summer. I know that was the sentiment you would hear around the space from a lot of people, but then we saw the markets get absolutely buried earlier this week, later last week. Big moves at substantially larger limits than were available there in May, June, and July. But now we are certainly kind of on the short end of the stick with value that's currently still out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we'll talk about it plenty between now, obviously, weeks 2 and week 3, where the market settles in, tries to identify which teams are going to be good, which teams are going to be bottom feeders, and public perception, as much as anything else in this NFL market, will play a role. So it's always fascinating to watch, to see some of the overreactions, the underreactions, and you talked a little bit about lines that have moved. We'll cover plenty of the marquee matchups, and one of the games on the docket has had absolutely no line movement whatsoever when we get into it. Just wanted to ask you, before we kick things off with a busy slate, are there any words of advice that you can offer up to bettors who might just be landing on the Bet the Board podcast for the first time and are looking to try and approach the NFL with a little more seriousness than what they've done in the past?
Don't get involved.
I'm not sure that was the answer I was looking for them, but I appreciate the candid honesty in all of it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we put out great content that's going to help you further your betting acumen. But I think if you're diving into the NFL market as a first hoorah into sports betting, it's going to be fun. Treat it like a hobby. Treat it as entertainment. The sophistication of the bettors and the groups that are now in this market render it very difficult for the common man to have an edge. However, as a hobby, this is fantastic because you can bet $100 and it can give you 3-4 hours of entertainment, and that is cheaper than taking your family to the movie. And now you have a chance, even if you're horrific at what you do, to win that money back maybe 40% of the time. So I think you're going to learn a lot here. I honestly, and the guys that I speak with that love this podcast, take notes as we are recording, because there's going to be pieces of information that can be applicable, maybe not this week, but in the weeks moving forward. So I would just kind of sit back, relax, treat this as a hobby if you were a casual fan tuning in for the very first time. But ultimately, I think we'll be able to enhance your level of betting acumen by just tuning into this podcast frequently.
I think that's great advice for a lot of people that are out there. Hey, look, they don't have the countless hours to commit to breaking down these games as in-depth as we do. The extensive network that you talk to about every single matchup each and every week throughout the course of the NFL season. So I know it's discouraging for folks, and I don't mean to start off on a negative note, but I want to set realistic expectations for people that you set aside money, to Payne's point, that you're using for recreation. Hey, look, if you turn a profit during football season, we tip our hat hat, but the goal is to make you smarter, more sophisticated, and make those bankrolls last just a little bit longer. All right, without further ado, let's get into the season opening matchup that pits this year's Super Bowl favorite against last year's Super Bowl champion on Thursday night, where the Rams will welcome in the Buffalo Bills. This number, we've seen a major market movement from where it opened up during the summer. The Rams initially 1-point favorites. Now Buffalo painted a 2.5-point chalk. Total in the game, 52. There are some 52.5s out there. And when you look at the Rams, this is a team that's got one of the league's most difficult schedules coming into the 2022 season. But they do have a favorable trade here that we've never seen before in league history. 10 of their 17 regular season games will actually come at SoFi Stadium. It'll be the first team to play 10-plus regular season games in their home stadium since Payne, a team you're fond of, the 1929 Frankfurt Yellow Jackets. I don't even know what city they played in back then. When you look at the Buffalo Bills, this is a roster that's extremely deep, both on the offensive and defensive side. And last year, they didn't win a single game by one possession. 12 wins on the season, all coming by 12-plus points, which included a postseason run, most by any team since the Bucs did it way back in 2002. When you look at some notable trends, more for fun and entertainment than anything else, the defending Super Bowl champions during week 1, going all the way back to 2000, 19-3 straight up. They have won 4 straight. ATS results kind of negligible in that regard. So as we set the game up, Payne, I'm not sure if we want to start with the number or we want to get at some of the X's and O's and circle all the way back in terms of why we've seen this movement through the zero.
No, we'll get to the really important thing right away. Frankfurt, a section in the northeastern part of Philadelphia.
See, there you go. It is the hotbed of all things football in the state of Pennsylvania. See, we've already made our listeners smarter. That is an absolutely useless nugget they can take to their coworkers and colleagues and pound their chests when they go to the water cooler on Friday.
No doubt about it. So I think the most intriguing part about this, when I look at the Bills' offense and the Rams' defense, and really their teams in general, is how the units are constructed differently, right? Like the Rams are this star-studded group with like little depth, and obviously Buffalo has Josh Allen and Diggs, but the Bills just have so much depth. Their offense, to me, is going to be predicated on just finding the open guy. It doesn't have to force feed specific players because the weapons are so plentiful, and you can have an approach here offensively where you can attack around where Jalen Ramsey isn't on the field. And I think that's really important, especially when you look at Diggs and that Ramsey matchup. They faced each other twice in their careers. Ramsey's allowed 2 receptions for 9 yards against Diggs. So the idea of having a Gabriel Davis, having just a slew of weapons out there, I think is pretty important. Now, Raheem Morris does a really good job when I look at his defenses disguising and presenting different looks to opposing offenses, right? They can play a 3-4. He can play a 4 down front when he thinks run is coming. There's some versatility there, and I think that allows Raheem Morris to cover up some of the holes. And ultimately, right, the Rams were the only defense to finish top 5 in both pass rush wins and interception. So he just does a very good job plugging some of the obvious holes that are here. I think if Raheem Morris is looking at this correctly and diving into some Josh Allen metrics, probably smart to send some blitzes at Josh Allen initially just to test that out in this game. And we are still wondering maybe where the ancillary pressure comes off the edge now that Von Miller is on the other side of the field here. But I want to see how Josh Allen handles the blitz. And we saw Morris last year, 11th highest blitz rate. For as mobile and as big, Josh didn't love being blitzed last year, and I think maybe the keys to those blitzes is having Josh Allen flushed outside the pocket, get him throwing on the move, where he was substantially less productive last year. Allen was actually 21st in EPA per pass attempt when outside the pocket. He was 19th when throwing on the move. All told, 26th in EPA per pass attempt when blitzed. So I think that needs to be the initial approach here. You can't just let Josh Allen sit back and kind of pick apart your defense in areas where again, Jalen Ramsey isn't. That's probably the best chance the Rams have of slowing Buffalo down. That's going to be the game within the game here. And, you know, not only was Josh Allen dramatically different quarterback when he was blitzed, the Rams defense was actually night and day when they got pressure versus not getting pressure. Rams defense was 9th worst down to down in terms of efficiency on snaps. They didn't pressure the quarterback. So I think that's the interesting element here. Now, Buffalo did go out and upgraded their O-line. They added a few pieces, which I think helped depth. You have Saffold, who's going to start at guard. You have some Quisenberry, who's going to provide some depth at tackle. So there's a little bit more depth with the unit. The biggest move, though, I think, was hiring the offensive line coach, Aaron Cromber. He's one of the most respected offensive line coaches in the NFL. I think in this specific game might be a little bit of a tactical advantage there for Buffalo. Cromer spent the last 4 seasons actually coaching the Rams offensive line. So I think that's the other element that's intriguing here. He knows what the defensive line members, specifically Aaron Donald, like to do, having gone against it at practice every day, and I think he'll be able to coach his guys up here. Also, Josh Allen, first time playing a meaningful NFL game in his home state. Friends and family are going to be in attendance. I think the venue is probably a breath of fresh air, right? It's a dome, no wind. We think no weather to deal with, but we are hearing something a little different there, and I'll let you elaborate on that when I finish up here. But I think the interesting part about Buffalo's offense is we saw the dichotomy last season for Buffalo, and I know everyone raves about home field advantage, but this offense was substantially better on the road. Buffalo averaged 1.5 yards more per pass attempt on the road, passer rating 7 points higher, explosive play rate increased 5% on the highway. So it doesn't shock me this total initially ticked up, but it does feel like there's now a little bit of a battle ensuing here on this total, Todd.
Go figure. Buffalo's offense gets to be a lot more explosive when they're not playing with 50-mile-an-hour winds, sideways hail, crooked rain, whatever else they have to deal with out there in Western New York. To Bills Mafia credit, it doesn't deter them whatsoever from getting out there and creating a college-like atmosphere each and every Sunday throughout the fall. You mentioned weather on an interesting storyline that's brewing for those folks that haven't followed it. Apparently, when you spend $5 billion and you build SoFi Stadium, given its placement in Los Angeles, they didn't feel there was a need for central air. So all the buzz is that it could be a little bit sticky and warm inside the building for today's game. I'm very curious. When you watch some of the pregame coverage, we'll be able to see exactly what some of the guys and girls on the telecast look like. It almost reminds me, Payne, of a few years ago when I think it was your Florida State Seminoles went up to the Carrier Dome for a game in either late August or early September, and it was like 103 degrees in the dome because they didn't have central air up there either.
Yeah, and so I'm going to dance around this a little bit. It's supposed to be 85 outside at the time of this game, but it could be substantially warmer inside. And if the temperature is what people are speculating it to be, that it'll be at least 90 degrees inside, if you start to look at some of that data, it certainly lends itself a little bit to the over. But again, a little bit of a battle there. Once this got to 53, a very well-respected group did come in on the under here. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, because it could be a storyline that not a lot of people know about, but will once we start seeing pregame coverage.
When we go to the other side of the ball, and we'll get there for a second, there is one follow-up that I did want to ask about in terms of Buffalo's offense. Do you expect continuity? You mentioned the offensive line coach, but obviously the big offseason move. Brian Daboll heads south in the state to take over as head coach of the New York Giants, and while Ken Dorsey has been on staff there, do you think the same philosophies still apply, or Sean McDermott could potentially strong-arm an OC calling plays for the first time in his NFL career?
Ken Dorsey's my guy, and I think
the nicest thing you've said about somebody that came out of Miami, and I don't know how long. Look at that.
Ed Reed's the greatest safety of all time. I've been banging that drum too. Just no one wants to absorb it.
That's what happens when you're a homer.
I think Dorsey is really sophisticated, and I know he is well respected within coaching trees, and this is not going to be a shock to see him continue to elevate his status in this league at all, because he is just sharp as a whip. He's got this cerebral sense of the game, and if you listen to some of the recruiting stories that Butch Davis had there, it's like, I knew this was my quarterback when I saw him play a basketball game, where he looked pregame where his team was outmanned. Let's just put it that way. And
I actually read the story as well. I saw some of the quotes from Butch. Go ahead, I'll let you continue to tell
Butch was like, yeah, I looked at the talent on the floor here, and boy, did his team look outmanned. And then all of a sudden he saw him operate the offense, and he was just cooking dudes left and right, because he just had this sense of the floor and what was around him. So I think We could see a little bit more of a run element here because Sean McDermott wants that, and you go out and you get a Roger Saffold, who I mentioned, who's substantially better as a run blocker than in pass protection. And, you go and draft James Cook now, who's fantastic out of the backfield catching balls, and I think that's how he'll be implemented most, at least early on in the season. But you've tried to upgrade the running back room, and we know the battle that McDermott was having with Daboll, and so I do think we'll see a little bit more running, but it doesn't necessarily, come at the cost of, offensive efficiency. I think when you look at what Dorsey's trying to implement here is he's going to maybe lessen the amount of passing slightly, but he wants to increase and enhance the efficiency in the pass game with run after the catch. That was one thing that you could see dramatically change here, and that the route concepts and trees are going to allow for more run after the catch as opposed to more air yards that we saw last year with Buffalo. So that's something to kind of monitor. But again, when we have these wholesale changes offensively, just like you guys listening to this is a data point for us that we're going to absorb and try to figure out if this has relevance moving forward, and if we can start to apply it and think it's going to happen a little bit more than what odds makers believe and try to be out ahead there. I don't know what that means exactly for this game, but I do think we'll see a touch more running.
Hey, it always bears watching. We know Buffalo's got a bit of a muddled running back situation. We'll see who ultimately emerges as a true bell cow, if there is one. I know there are fantasy owners that have probably rostered all three of those guys, hoping that Zach Moss isn't only seeing touches inside the 3-yard line and vulturing touchdowns away from the other tandem of backs. When you look at the other side of the ball, this is a Buffalo defense that was good last year. Metrically, you look at some of the counting stats, and they were elite. But obviously a little bit of noise in the numbers, something that you pointed out on multiple occasions when they stepped up in class. They were a true beneficiary of a relatively soft schedule that inflated those tags. They did add Von Miller, who you alluded to earlier, showcased plenty of juice after joining the Rams, will obviously return to the scene of his best ball last year. Pass defense still without Tre'Davious White early in the season. Jordan Poyer was a little bit nicked up, should be a full go here. And of course, the biggest storyline for the Rams offense all offseason about the elbow of Matthew Stafford and the potential limitations it could place. If you believe Stafford, you believe McVay, it's not going to have any role. Meanwhile, Matthew Stafford will adjust to life without Odell Beckham Jr. and some of the other receivers, but in steps Allen Robinson and potentially a rapid rising Von Jefferson as well.
So if you're making the manual boost in projections for Buffalo's offense playing in what we think are better conditions than they dealt with last year, you have to make a slight downward adjustment to the Bills' defense as well. Buffalo was really aided by having home games in this below-average weather, whether it was heavy winds, gusts, freezing temperatures, snow, you name it. Buffalo's defense got help from the heavens in more than half their home games last season. You factor that in with the schedule, of which you just kind of alluded to and hinted at. It was the second easiest schedule of offenses. And then you had a stretch where throughout the entire season, if you looked at rookie quarterbacks or backup quarterbacks, Buffalo's defense faced 10 of them. And when you do that, you can kind of see how pro bettors don't think Buffalo's defense is as good as it appears on the surface, or a lot of the talking heads believe. We've also had, a recent battle here between the two Seans, where McVay got the best of McDermott. If you go back to week 3 of the 2020 season, McVay went into Buffalo. The Rams had went out there, 57% success rate, a positive 0.29 EPA per play, hung 35 points, and that was all with Jared Goff. So there is history here where McVay has gotten the better of McDermott. Now, I know they had some battles when McVay was the OC at Washington and, didn't have necessarily a ton to work with there. But, you also look at this. Buffalo's breaking in 2 new starting cornerbacks. Levi Wallace left in free agency. He was an average corner last season. All-world corner Tre'Davious White starts the season on the PUP, so he's going to miss the first 4 weeks. That's a massive loss. And if you look at Tre'Davious White's career, his numbers actually mirror Jalen Ramsey's in terms of reception rate allowed, yards per coverage snap allowed, yards per target surrendered. So you're looking at Dane Jackson and the rookie Kareem Elam. Let's see if they can hold up outside. And I think they're going to be tested by McVay just based on the scheme. And then you have Stafford and his willingness to attack downfield. So those young guys are going to be tested. And we talked about this a little bit on the preview podcast, but it's wild when you kind of put it in some of these contexts. Year over year, Matthew Stafford's passes on average traveled 30% further in 2021 than Goff's with the Rams in 2020. And you kind of hinted at that Peter King report there on Monday that Stafford's elbow is feeling great. I don't know why that needs to be said, but it is what it is.
You always wonder why that stuff has to come out, and you have to reiterate that he's feeling 100% going into the season.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about Stafford's elbow feeling 100% heading into last year. So I think when you look at the Rams scheme and you look at McVay, they used these 3 wide receiver sets roughly like 86% of the time last season. So I would expect the Rams to hunt through the air and test the Bills' cornerbacks. And for Buffalo to kind of combat that, they have to get natural pressure because you can't blitz Stafford. He was one of the best of any qualifying quarterback in the league last season in terms of defense-adjusted value over average when blitzed last season. 19 touchdowns to 1 pick. You cannot pressure the guy. And the Bills finished last year 6th in pass rush win rate. So you have to get it naturally. Gregory Rousseau, everything that I'm hearing, looks poised to make a year 2 leap. 12% pressure rate on pass rush snaps last season. Von Miller, as you alluded to, gets the massive deal. He's familiar with what the Rams offensive line wants to do as a unit and individually as players, so maybe a little bit of an edge there. Buffalo also improved the interior of the defense. Ed Oliver might not be the best run stuffer, but did finish 7th in pass rush win rate among interior linemen. Tim Settle is a solid pressure guy for being 330 pounds. Last season, Jordan Phillips is now back in Buffalo. The last season he was there, very good. Finished with 10 sacks from the inside. So that's the interesting element here. I think Buffalo has a better chance to get pressure than they did last season, and last season they were damn good doing it. You look at the Rams' offensive line, really where you want to attack them is on the interior. I think Brian Allen's a liability as a pass protecting center. Good run blocker, but finished 35th in snaps per blown block among qualifying centers. So if Buffalo can get pressure on the inside naturally, that's going to go a long way, right? Have Stafford move off his spots a little bit and maybe, dissuade him from hitting some receivers downfield if he doesn't have as much time. Van Jefferson's been a little banged up. Allen Robinson certainly can stretch a field, and you look at Cooper Kupp running underneath. I think that's probably going to be a little bit of a problem, and there's some word coming out of camp here that Allen Robinson's looking fantastic, and McVay was shocked by his route tree and didn't think Robinson could run certain routes based upon the film and couldn't line up in certain spots based on the film, and apparently he's proven otherwise in camp, and that's been a real mover in terms of the prop betting market this week. We've seen Allen Robinson start to take money over his receiving yards, so he's kind of the guy that I think might be keyed on as they try to push the ball downfield, aside from obviously Cooper Kupp running some stuff underneath and through the seams.
Should be one hell of a game to kick things off between the team that a lot of people believe will finally break through and win the first Super Bowl in franchise history, and we'll see if the Rams can handle life atop the mountain with a giant target on their back. Anything else?
What do you make of this spread, by the way?
I'm surprised that it's moved as much. I'm not surprised that Buffalo has garnered this much attention. I think all of us are sitting watching going, all right, will there be enough public action and public support, knowing that the sharp guys got it going, taking one on Buffalo to drive this number up to 3. So I'm going to be curious to watch some of the shops out here in the desert that cater to a more recreational business, if they're willing to go to 3 and see how quickly that gets snapped back up.
Yeah, I think when you look at the overall Rams profile, both their power ratings and then their total schedule adjusted team efficiency last year, the Rams don't have the makeup of a Super Bowl winner, despite the 4 big names, right, with Stafford and Kupp and Ramsey and Donald. And the betting market's telling us the Bills deserve to enter the season as the number 1 team. Then you had the questions with Stafford's elbow and then the health of Cam Akers, and so we went from Buffalo +1 to like -2.5. I have been hearing that if we got to 3, there's going to be an order coming in on the Rams. It looks like that started to get taken out a little bit, and some of the other guys that I respect started using Rams and teasers to get through the 3 and the 7. So that's kind of the interesting element here. We did have some early money on Buffalo, and I don't know if we're going to get back to 3. 2.5 feels like the right number here.
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be books out here. Look, I mean, the sharper shops that deal to customers that are known to have an edge. In my opinion, I don't think there's a chance in hell we see that go to 3. There may be some books that dabble a little bit there or juice 2.5. We did just see the first 51.5 pop in the market as we closed out the breakdown. on this particular football game. But from Thursday, we move on to Sunday. And while we talked about the team that won the Lombardi Trophy last season, the team that came up just short was, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals. And they find themselves 6.5-point favorites as they welcome in the Pittsburgh Steelers for their season opener. The Bengals have now won 3 straight against the Steelers. It's actually the longest winning streak for them against the Steel City natives since 1988 through the 1990 stretch, where they won 6 straight, mainly led by one Boomer Esiason there. The first time the Bengals will be 4+ point favorites against the Steelers since 2013. So it just speaks about how one-sided this rivalry has been and how the pendulum is beginning to swing. Interesting note on the Steelers as well. They'll travel the fewest miles of any team in the National Football League this season. They're the only team in the NFL that won't actually leave its own time zone. Not sure that'll matter late in the year, but a fun nugget to share now nonetheless. When you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, hey, look, we know how good Mike Tomlin has been in the division. They're 9-2 against the number as an underdog in divisional games going back to 2018. And in his career as an underdog in divisional games, Mike Tomlin 18-6-2 against the spread, tied with Bill Belichick for best cover percentage during that span. And one other trend to throw into the mix, teams coming off a Super Bowl loss, while they're just 4-18 against the spread in their season opener, 9-13 straight up if we go back to 2000. But then again, most of those teams didn't have to face Trubisky truthers in the season opener. And Payne, that was obviously the biggest storyline for Pittsburgh, electing to put rookie starting quarterback Kenny Pickett on the shelf early on, going to Mitchell Trubisky to kick things off for their season opener against the Bengals.
And with Mitch Trubisky, I think the Steelers' offense can be a little bit more diverse, right? I mean, at age 40, Big Ben was very much a shotgun-only quarterback that threw quick and short. There was nothing else Ben could do. 61% of Ben's passes traveled 5 yards or less last season, and he would routinely tip off run pass based upon his feet placement. So even though we're not like in love with Mitch Trubisky, there's some things you can at least do with him, pushing the ball downfield, using his legs, and I think that's what ultimately you're going to see with Matt Canada. He's going to call more rollouts, more boots, maybe even play action increase a small amount from one of the league's lowest rates. And then you do have the ability where if the play is dead, Mitch can scramble when things break down. And it just feels like he meshes with what Matt Canada wants to do, especially with the love for pre-snap motion. And I would, again, expect to see the ball being pushed downfield a little bit more with Trubisky. But specific to this matchup, you can see why the Steelers have the second lowest team total on all the Sunday games. The one offense this preseason that had to show a lot of its concepts and what it wants to do was Pittsburgh. You were breaking in 2 brand new quarterbacks to the scheme. There was a quarterback competition, so you wanted to see which one could operate your system to the fullest. And so there's that built-in advantage where there's a lot of stuff on film that a very savvy Bengals defense can incorporate, right? Like the Bengals don't have the most talented defense, but you're now in year 3 of Lou Anarumo's system, and they're very smart. They're sophisticated. There's also some rumors that have been swirling that they may unveil a 3-safety look with Dax Hill being on the field at the same time as Bates and Bell. Maybe we see glimpses of that going against a mobile quarterback like Trubisky. I know the reason that we kind of mocked Dax to Cincinnati and took him, in the first round with props was, one, you had the Bates contract issues, and then you're playing Baltimore and Lamar Jackson 2 times a season, and being able to have, 3 safeties on the field at once and remove a linebacker helps with speed to negate some of Lamar Jackson's ability. So I think we may see that potentially here because Mitch is also quite mobile. And I think that's interesting here because as you look at the Bengals defense, right, they're going to use this 4-down front of Hendrickson, Hubbard, Hill, and Reeder. And I think they're going to be able to just take away Pittsburgh's ground game and maybe get some pressure in these known passing situations. Pittsburgh, to me, well, they might do things a little bit better this year. It's still an offense that was 31st in first down efficiency last season. Najee Harris was dealing with a Liz Frank injury late in camp. The Steelers' O-line finished 28th in adjusted line yards, 31st in pass block win rate. I know they brought in James Daniel and Mason Cole, but those 2 guys are learning a new system. On Tuesday, Mike Tomlin hinted that the O-line isn't where it needs to be at this point. So
not a ringing endorsement.
I don't know if we're going to see dramatic improvement from that O-line. You also have Deontay Johnson, who has a shoulder injury, got hurt in the Lions game. He worked off to the side on Wednesday. I think there's more optimism today than there was earlier in the week that he would play. But, I mean, the reason you have a Bengals total that's sitting well below an average NFL number is because Pittsburgh's offense and the Bengals' continuity and sophistication on defense is what's kind of contributing to this. There's also some potential weather in the forecast until about 2 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. So, I would also check the weather reports and we're recording first thing Thursday morning. Weather can change, but certainly keep your eye on the radar for this game. And that's ultimately this Pittsburgh offense is dictating us seeing a 44.5 here.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a side and total that really hasn't moved whatsoever. Open 6.5, 44.5, and has pretty much been painted everywhere. Curious to see if you do get a move in either the side or the total as you get closer to game day. Now, for all the question marks we have on the Steelers offense, specifically with the offensive line, this is still one of the league's most expensive defenses. And when you're talking about star power, the Steelers have a ton of it. Of course, led by TJ Watt, who's 22 sacks last season, have allowed him to accumulate 72 through 5 seasons. It places him in elite company. We know what Minkah Fitzpatrick can do as he led all defensive backs in tackles last season. But this was a Steelers defense that looked anything but like a steel curtain a season ago. They were leaky against the run. There were all sorts of records broken, not exactly in a positive manner, as they allowed 146 rushing yards per game and allowed 5 yards per carry. Those were NFL worst in both categories. In steps the Cincinnati Bengals, who retooled on their offensive line. We know about all the weapons they have, and you have to imagine that Joe Burrow is only going to get better. When you look at this side of the ball, what do the Steelers have to do to give themselves a puncher's chance, knowing if it turns into a firefight, they don't have an offense capable of keeping up?
Change their antiquated ways.
All right, so that's not going to happen. That's a short-winded way of saying this game is over before it started.
They did go with a new DC in Terrell Austin, and then you added Brian Flores, who has more of some new school concepts in his bag. So hopefully that helps. But it does sound like Mike Tomlin's still the guy calling plays here, and hopefully with multiple months to prepare for a division opponent, that there's a little bit more sophistication here. Cincinnati did whatever it wanted to offensively against Pittsburgh in the 2 matchups last season, and they weren't really pushed in that week 3 matchup where Burrow only had to throw 14 times. I want to see Mike Tomlin do something innovative for this specific matchup. And last year, if you look at the Steelers, they played man-to-man cover 1, 31% of snaps. Their preferred zone coverage was cover 3, which they employed 33% of the time. You look at Burrow against those 2 defenses, 85% of his passes completed for 10 yards an attempt. So he was very good against those 2 types of defenses, which is predominantly what Pittsburgh runs. So that's not going to work here, and you've had months to prepare for this. So hopefully we see something a little bit different from Pittsburgh. In total, Cincinnati had the 5th most explosive passing offense last season, 21 touchdowns outside the red zone. We saw Burrow led the NFL with 11 touchdown passes of 20 or more air yards. He only had 9 completions of 20 or more air yards in 2020. So Jamar Chase impact was real. T. Higgins growing up in year 2 was massive. Burrow also had the very best on-target rate of any quarterback at 83%. He was the most accurate quarterback in the league. You have to find something to disrupt that. And so you wonder if Tomlin's going to toss in some too high shell looks to limit the Bengals' explosiveness and make them work the ball downfield. Cincinnati was actually 19th in down-to-down success rate against the 2nd easiest schedule of defenses. So maybe making them try to work the ball, 6-7 yards a clip downfield is something to negate their best ability last year, which was explosiveness. And I know there was some comments from Joe Burrow saying that that's what they worked on all season because that's what they anticipate coming to them. Well, let's see it, right? Because the old method isn't going to work here of the defensive style that Pittsburgh is playing. So that'll be interesting to see how this works. I just don't think you can play cover 1 against Cincinnati. It's just not going to work. If Tomlin does force Cincinnati to kind of methodically move the ball, that's where things get interesting because we know the Bengals went out, they revamped the offensive line. Let's see what it looks like in real action. The style of defense we think Pittsburgh should play, again, has this goal of forcing you to methodically move it, and maybe you make a mistake. But with the Bengals' improved O-line, which we think is going to really enhance the ground game, Pittsburgh, as you alluded to at the top, was a disaster stopping the run. 27th in defensive rush efficiency. Had the worst explosive run defense in the league. If Karras, Cap, and Collins, the 3 free agent signings, play to the contract, things could be scary. If you look, not just with the ground game, but in terms of pass protection, When the Bengals didn't give up a sack on a drive last season, they were second in touchdown rate, second in points per drive. That's why, we know they're going to face a substantially more difficult schedule of defenses this season. But they've made the right improvements that kind of give you the thought that they might be able to be up to snuff against some of those improved defenses, especially if they've been able to figure out what they anticipate coming with the too high shell. All told here, Todd, I'm hearing behind the scenes some influential folks would like to take 7 on this game. They're not sure it gets there again. It was there earlier this summer at substantially lower limits. If it does get back to 7, I think, maybe we see a Steelers buy order on game day with larger limits.
It's always interesting when you look at the success that divisional underdogs have had going back to 2014. It's a pretty strong success rate, albeit not a massive sample size, but that increased level of familiarity as teams are trying to figure out their identity usually lends itself to significantly closer football games. And it was only a season ago where a mediocre Pittsburgh Steelers team at best went on the road, used a little bit of smoke and mirrors, cloak and dagger to upset the Buffalo Bills as a similarly priced underdog. We'll see if they're able to exact a measure of revenge against the Bengals team that did what they wanted when they wanted against them a season ago. From the early games, we make our way out to the West Coast of sorts, where the Arizona Cardinals will welcome in the Kansas City Chiefs. And this number has been on the move all week long. Right now, we're looking at Kansas City, a 6-point road favorite. Total in the game sits at 53.5. Obviously, a high level of familiarity between a starting quarterback on one side and a head coach on the other side. And Patrick Mahomes was pretty outspoken about it. He talked about how influential Cliff Kingsbury had been. Patrick Mahomes, lightly recruited as a baseball player, went in Texas Tech and attributes a lot of his professional success to what the quarterback whisperer of sorts did to him. Kansas City, high expectations this year, but they almost feel like the forgotten team, as we talked about on the AFC West preview, looking to extend that streak of 6 straight division titles, bringing it out to 7. Last year was actually the first time under Andy Reid's leadership that the Chiefs did not go over their preseason win total, but they'd have a daunting task ahead of them. They're going to be the first team in NFL history to start the season with 8 straight games against teams that had a winning record the prior season. Only one of their first 12 games comes against the teams that with a losing record last season, and that's Week 10 against the Jacksonville Jaguars team, who we expect to be drastically improved. Payne, I feel like we'd be doing our listeners a bit of a disservice before we got into the X's and O's if we didn't address a pretty substantial move from 3 out to 6 on this game.
Yeah, I think we can probably be a little bit quicker here, and there's multiple reasons for this move. Some is injury related. Some is just the Kansas City Chiefs in general, right? Like Andy Reid with extra time to prepare is really good. And you have that element heading into a week 1 game, not just buys, right? Reid's won the last 7 openers. The Chiefs are 5-2 in those games, and the total's gone over in all 7. So it's not surprising we've seen Chiefs and over money enter the market early. Believe it or not, despite what the media has told you, this Reid guy and this Mahomes guy can actually devise and execute a game plan. So, plus the other thing you got going here is the first team Chiefs offense was ridiculous in preseason. It would appear Reid spent the offseason figuring out how to combat the too high shell look that gave them some troubles last year. They went with really heavy sets. And so, kind of just looking at this matchup, if the Chiefs run from heavy, the strength of their O-line is on the interior. That's where the Cardinals' defensive line is weak. If they pass from those heavy sets with tight ends, we know there's questions about Isaiah Simmons and Xavier Collins. Simmons ranked 61st among qualifying linebackers in yards allowed per coverage snap, despite being just this freak athlete. In general, again, I think we spend less time in this game because of the movement, and I'll kind of explain the number here a little bit, but Arizona last year was 22nd in pressure rate, okay? Chandler Jones is gone. Jordan Hicks is gone. 2 of the top 5 pressure rate players Arizona had. J.J. Watt, if you follow this situation, dealt with COVID, has a calf injury, hasn't practiced in a week. Marcus Golden is trending towards a real game time decision, and if he somehow is able to play, he's not going to be remotely close to 100%. Arizona's number 2 corner, Antonio Hamilton, was involved in a cooking accident where he could have lost his life. He suffered some extreme burns. He's going to miss a few games. Trayvon Mullen was brought in to be the number 2 corner because Hamilton's injured. He is battling a toe and ankle injury, has not practiced yet. So this is why we've seen the Kansas City spread go from 3 to 6, substantial movement. I am hearing this is probably the peak. And if some of these injured players return, I'm hearing potential rumblings of a buy being sent on Arizona +6. But that's obviously pending some injury updates later today because Thursday's a vital day. But this is a really banged up team right now. And even on the other side, let's just kind of get through this game quickly because that's kind of where I'm at with this one. Where does Arizona start their offense this season? And I'll let you finish, right, with anything you want to comment on or ask. But where does Arizona start their offense this season? Right, that's the ultimate question. I think partly, again, why you're seeing this line movement. If you look the first 9 weeks last season, the Cardinals were number 1 in EPA per play on offense. From week 10 onward, it dipped to 14th. Hopkins is suspended the first 6 games. Ertz is also dealing with a calf injury. Finally got a limited practice in yesterday. What does that mean, though? Hollywood Brown is nice. He's got that rapport with Kyler, but it's not like he's an add-on. He's replacing Christian Kirk, who was wildly efficient last season for this offense. Rondale Moore finally got cleared to practice yesterday. He's missed the last week. We've talked about the Cardinals' offensive line on the preview series. It's old. We mentioned it, Justin Pugh dealing with a neck injury right now. Has not practiced yet this week. Hudson dealing with a nagging injury that is not being disclosed. He didn't practice yesterday. They're calling it rest. This isn't good long term, but even going back to life without Hopkins for Kyler Murray on the field, Murray's completion percentage with Hopkins out dipped 7%. Passing yards per attempt fell 2.2 yards with Hopkins off the field. That's kind of the barometer of where we anticipate this offense starting. In general, we talked about a lot of regression. Can James Conner scored 300 rushing touchdowns again this season in the red zone? Probably not going to happen, right? Third down regression likely coming. The Cardinals averaged 8.1 yards to go when Kyler Murray dropped back to pass on third down last season. It was the third most in the NFL. Somehow the Cardinals were the third best in the league in late down efficiency. They were third in third down conversions over expectation. So all of this is what's transpiring here. The sharpest of the sharp don't believe the demise of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes is going to happen. And the Arizona Cardinals were a sell team all offseason. That's why their win total went from 9.5 and it's now 8.5 as we talk about this game right now. But again, 6 is a massive number if some of these guys that are iffy end up playing, and it just get the vibe that there could be something brewing on Arizona. But again, that's what's transpiring with this game. It's tough to talk about a game that's moved 3 points, but obviously it's the Chiefs, it's Patrick Mahomes, it's a lot of off-season drama with the Arizona Cardinals. They're going to be the hard knocks team. You have some high-profile guys with Kyler and Cliff, and so that's why we're breaking this game down.
No, I think it makes a ton of sense. I mean, hey, look, some games lend themselves to a lot more nuanced breakdown, and some of them you just have to talk about the storylines that are developing. And in this case, we figured out that you were able to get your medical degree from the School of Hard Knocks without actually spending 7 years doing your residency, going to med school, as you broke down those injuries so eloquently to explain why this number has taken off and why you're seeing 2 different schools of thought depending on the price. And it's something that we're going to reiterate throughout the course of this podcast, next week, and until we're blue in the face. It's all about the number. You can love Kansas City to win the football game, but laying 3 is a very different proposition than laying 6 when you're talking about secondary key numbers and coming off one of the primary key numbers that's out there. To your point, talking about Arizona, you highlighted how the offense more or less fell off a cliff, no pun intended, when DeAndre Hopkins was shelved last year. But to the same thing, those numbers with Patrick Mahomes rather staggering with what he's done. And I'll even take it one step further. When you look at this Chiefs team that has won 7 straight Week 1 games, which is the longest active streak in the National Football League, all 7 games during that win streak have gone over the total. The average points per game in those contests is north of 60, and the Chiefs as a franchise have scored 27 or more points, and that includes games before Patrick Mahomes took over. When you just look at Mahomes and what he's done in Week 1, albeit a small sample size, 4-0, 14 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, a completion percentage of 71%, 300 yards per game passing, and he's led Kansas City's offense to north of 5 touchdowns a contest at 36 points per game. So a lot of information to absorb there that we'll put in there. And I'm right there with you. I think the demise of Kansas City's offense, because there is no Tyreek Hill, let's not put one foot in the grave. This offense now may be more multiple and more difficult to defend because Patrick Mahomes came out and said it. Hey, look, fantasy managers, you may be disappointed, but it's going to be a different player each week that we're focusing on. And I think Mahomes and Andy Reid will relish this challenge, knowing that it's going to give defensive coordinators on the other side fits trying to figure out who they need to take away.
And you see it, right? I mean, Patrick Mahomes is in a little bit better shape. I know the wife had a kid recently, so sometimes you come home, you eat ice cream with her on the couch. He's lost about 12 pounds. He's certainly motivated because everyone has told him that he's nothing without Tyreek Hill, and then Tyreek Hill came out and said that Tua's a a better passer. And so, but we have the data, right? If you go back to 2018 with Tyreek Hill off the field, whether it was injury, whether it was missing a snap for a breather, Patrick Mahomes is still number 2, the second best quarterback in terms of EPA per dropback since 2018 when Tyreek Hill is even off the field. So there's some data supporting that this thing isn't over. Now, in terms of, again, going back to the price, and a lot of people do listen to this podcast as a hobby, but the reality is, like, sports betting market, right? Market. This is a market. Just like any other market, price matters. So that's kind of the battle you're going to have here is the guys that went out and laid 3, awesome. It's just a different discussion at 6, even though the two teams are the same.
No doubt about it. And I think that was, as succinctly as we can break it down, one of the marquee matchups, but it's not worth getting into some of the X's and O's as in-depth as we've done on the first 2 games, since price is the driving force in everything we do. Moving from the West Coast to the Twin Cities, the Minnesota Vikings will welcome in the Green Bay Packers for their season opener in the debut of the Kevin O'Connell era at US Bank Stadium. Green Bay, a 1.5-point road favorite in this contest, total in the game at 47, down a touch from where it opened, as well as the side. The home team won and covered both games last year. Of course, Kirk Cousins didn't play in the second matchup at Lambeau Field, much to the chagrin of Bet the Board listeners, as we had a best bet on the Vikings. That was dead before they ever even kicked that football game off. When you look at the last 4 games between these teams, they've seen 47 or more points. The only game that didn't get to 50 was the Kirk Cousins absence, a 37-10 win for the Green Bay Packers. Last year, the Minnesota Vikings, they tied an NFL record with 14 one-possession football games. The Packers, meanwhile, became the first team in league history to win 13-plus games in 3 straight seasons. The expanded schedule obviously didn't hurt them getting the additional game. When you look at what Green Bay has done, they've been as dynamic on the road as they have been at home, although there is obviously a little bit of a disparity. 17-8-8 on the highway under Coach LaFleur, 22-2 at Lambeau Field. But interestingly enough, the Green Bay Packers are actually under 500 as a road favorite with LaFleur at the helm, 7-8 against the spread. But in every other situation, this is a team that's gone 25-9 against the number lining people's pockets. And Payne, we may as well start with this new look Packers offense. Aaron Rodgers remains the same under center. The backfield arguably as dynamic in any in the league with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. But the storyline, the receiving core, are going to be very different. And of course, one of the key cogs for Green Bay expected to potentially miss Sunday's season opener.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at this matchup between the Packers offense and the Vikings defense, you probably start with some of the additions of the Vikings defense, right? You added Smith, Harrison, and some younger depth pieces along with just being healthy week 1, right? Like, nice to see Danielle Hunter out there. The defensive coordinator, Ed Donatel, that's someone we like. He's from a defensive coaching tree that we absolutely love with Fangio, and so I think we're expecting the Vikings defense to improve a little bit here. Now, what Ed Donatel runs is a ton of quarters coverage, a lot of cover 6. Aaron Rodgers does see a lot of that in practice every day. But I think we are questioning the talent that's around Aaron Rodgers right now. Lazard is trending towards being out. It's now Sammy Watkins and Randall Cobb. That's the tandem. Neither of those guys have the juice to be great downfield threats. So it's likely Green Bay operates in a phone booth unless Dobbs and Watson become field stretchers that Aaron Rodgers trusts out of the gate in week 1. And I think the hype was for Dobbs, but then we saw the article yesterday where Aaron Rodgers was really praising Christian Watson. So let's see what comes of that. But I do believe we're going to see some ground and pound from a team that used it a bunch already. If you look at LaFleur, he's dialed up a 52% run rate on first down the first 3 quarters over the last 2 seasons. A.J. Dillon's lost some more of his bad weight. He's more polished. Aaron Jones is an absolute home run threat. And if you look at the Vikings makeup last year, again, although they improved, I think, on the interior a little bit with the Smith addition, the Vikings were dead last in EPA surrendered against the run. You have questionable receivers. Maybe that's the path we see Green Bay take early. The other thing that's interesting here is the man that torched Minnesota through the air is gone, right? Davante Adams in the last 4 matchups against the Vikings, 39 receptions for 460 yards and 8 touchdowns.
It's like 7-on-7 football when you watch those games.
I mean, Harrison Smith is going to be a happy man not seeing that guy downfield. The other thing that's interesting is with Adams gone and Lazard unlikely to play, that probably means more Aaron Jones, right? You go back to that 2019 season when Adams missed 4 games with a toe injury. Aaron Jones, 27 targets, 280 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. In games that Adams missed the last 3 seasons, Aaron Jones has 20% of the Packers' target share. So I think he is fully immersed into the passing game this week. There's also some good signs here, Todd, that both Bakhtiari and Elkington Jenkins are going to start at the tackle positions. So that's big for Aaron Rodgers in this offense as well.
Hey, I mean, David Bakhtiari, he's played just 1 game since tearing his ACL in December of 2020. I know Packers fans were excited about his return last year, and it felt like every week we saw him on the injury report get upgraded and then ultimately get ruled out. You talked about Elton Jenkins. He's, of course, been out since tearing his ACL in November of last year. And from an offensive standpoint, they even get Robert Tonyan back in the fold, who was out since October of last year with a torn ACL. One other thing on Aaron Jones that I think you raised a great point when you look at just his raw numbers. On average, without Davante Adams, 67 rushing yards, 55 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns, and for those folks scoring at home on average, that's 25 fantasy points per game. So clearly a guy that could break out if the Packers look to utilize him as a receiver and maybe even deploy some 2-back sets. Meanwhile, on the other side, Payne, this Minnesota Vikings offense should get out of the Stone Ages and enter the 21st century with an offensive-minded head coach. And you're looking at Captain Kirk Cousins, top 6 in the NFL in completion percentage, touchdown interception ratio, and passer rating since joining the Vikings back in 2018. The problem for him is he's only 19th in winning percentage. He does own 18 career games of 300-plus passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. If him and Kevin O'Connell get on the same page, this is going to be a great test early on because it's fair, in my opinion, to say that the strength of the Green Bay Packers and the known commodity this year could be what do they bring to the table on the defensive side.
I think that's actually the big question is, can Minnesota's offense hit the ground running, right? Because Kevin O'Connell took the Rams approach of keeping guys as healthy as he could as opposed to getting them valuable reps in the preseason. And, that's kind of the heads or tails breakdown of this because, sure, Minnesota might not be in form, but I do believe the concepts and the principles are going to be substantially better from a scheme perspective. But the one thing that's interesting is you listen to some of the interviews and you have Packers defenders talk about, sure, we know some of the player tendencies because they're within our own division, and we can watch the film from the Rams because that's where Kevin O'Connell comes from. But Devondre Campbell, who's the green dot of the Packers defense, said this week, for the first quarter and a half, we're going to be reading our keys and reacting because we don't know exactly what to expect here. So that's the interesting element. Is it not knowing what's potentially coming going to be a benefit to the Vikings offense? Or we know implementing a new offense and scheme does take time. So that's interesting. But what I would expect right off the bat is more early down passes from Kevin O'Connell. Minnesota was 26th in early down pass rate with a neutral game state with the last regime. And Kevin O'Connell was 4th in the same category the last 2 seasons calling plays for the Rams. So that's likely going to be one of the biggest offensive changes we'll see this entire season. And then you look at the increase of pass rate. It's probably going to come from 3 wide receiver sets. As I mentioned when we broke down the Rams game, that was personnel the Rams lived in on 86% of the snaps. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to run from that set, right? In fact, sometimes it's actually helpful for your run game. Defenses will come out and dime or nickel, which is, 5 or 6 defensive backs to defend the more receivers. And that allows you to run into lighter boxes and into smaller personnel that's actually on the field. And that's something to watch for, I think, in this matchup. Over the past 3 seasons, Dalvin Cook is 5th, 7th, and 1st in EPA per rush from 11 personnel. The problem is, again, the prior regime never used it effectively. It was the 4th lowest run rate from 3 wide receiver sets for the Vikings last year. And you look at what the Packers do, right? They employ this 5 defensive back strategy as their base defense. And if you look at Green Bay, they allowed a 58% success rate on runs from 3 wide sets and a tick less than 5 yards per rush. So that's an interesting matchup advantage potentially here brewing for Dalvin Cook and the Minnesota run offense. Schematically, I think the Vikings have the potential to be really, successful here. But again, it's game 1. It's a brand new offense. These things take some time. I also believe, to your point at the top there, that Green Bay's defense is going to improve this season just based on random variance and better health,
Yeah.
Green Bay, 12. You go ahead.
No. I was going to say, and I didn't mean to cut you off there. I mean, I think, oftentimes so much focus from the general media, and I know the narrative has switched, but you were the first one to tip us off to it, that Green Bay was stockpiling talent defensively. And while they get widely criticized for not taking a first-round receiver to give Aaron Rodgers the weapon he needs, you look at this team that is so much more athletic, so much faster defensively than what they would have been 3 to 5 years ago, and it's finally paying dividends when you have difference makers at every single level. So go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
No, you didn't. And I think that's right. I mean, they've been stockpiling some of this talent, and the best piece of talent they have is a guy that we've pounded the table for in Jair Alexander. And that's a guy who only played 5 games last year. He is a shutdown corner. Now, that's going to be a fun matchup this week, obviously. And you look at what Jair Alexander brings to the Packers defense. He's going to help a unit that somehow finished 27th in third down defense. So again, one of those like variance metrics that probably zaps back to normal with Jair in the lineup. Overall, you had a Green Bay defense that finished 12th in early down success rate, but then finished 22nd in overall defensive efficiency. So that dichotomy there is probably calling for some positive regression for this defense. The other thing that just to keep an eye on, matchup-wise, Irv Smith Jr. is a relative unknown. We haven't really seen him do much. We like his traits, but he missed all of last season, and then he had a thumb injury in camp that kept him out. Wes Phillips is the Vikings OC. He likes getting the tight ends involved. Green Bay struggled to defend tight ends last season. They were outside the top 25 in catch rate allowed and touchdown rate allowed to tight ends. So if Irv Smith Jr. is 100% healed with that thumb injury and the meniscus tear that kept him up, he's got an interesting role in this offense, not just this week, but overall as well, Todd.
Yeah, and I think this Vikings team is going to be one that's fun to watch. I mean, people know kind of our sentiments on this team when we broke them down on the NFC North podcast a few weeks ago and about some of our expectations. It was a team that we were high on last year that just couldn't get out of their own way when it mattered most. We'll see if a change at head coach allows the Vikings to try and scratch the surface on some of the potential that's there in what should be a muddled picture top to bottom as far as the NFC is concerned. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And I should have reminded all of you, our loyal listeners, earlier on in the show, and I was remiss to do so, sign up. BetTheBoardContest.com. It is the single best free football handicapping contest you're going to find this season. Pick 5 games each week. There are season-long prizes. There are weekly swag packs. So many different ways to get in on it. And if you miss a week, it's not the end of the world. There are cash and prizes you can get by putting together a good record and matching wits against some of the sharpest handicappers out there that are loyal Bet the Board listeners. When we talk about the muddled NFC picture, Payne, obviously these two teams that'll be under the bright lights at Sunday night in Arlington, Texas, are going to complicate things further. And that, of course, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. The Bucs right now, a 2.5-point road favorite. Total on this game sits at 51, and we've obviously seen this number ping-pong its way all over the place amid speculation who was going to be available, who wasn't going to be available, offensive line injuries for both of these football teams. It's a rematch of last year's season opener, a game the Bucs won 31-29 on opening night, failing to cover as nearly 9-point favorites. It's a matchup of the only two teams in the league to average 30 points per game or more last year, and most prolific offenses when playing in their own building. Speaking of which, the Cowboys, they were 10 points per game better playing at Jerry's World when they took their show out on the road. Meanwhile, Tom Brady makes history as the oldest quarterback to start a game at the ripe age of 45 years old. Interesting note with Tom Brady, his team's 10-0-2 over their win total over the last 12 seasons. Meanwhile, the Dallas Cowboys come into the year looking to break a historical trend, one that has seen the NFC East have a different division winner for 17 straight seasons. Payne, we've seen Tom Brady struggle at night. You know what happens? Old men like to go to bed a little bit earlier. Will this be a spot he plays with a chip on his shoulder and allows the Bucs offense to go out there and attack the Cowboys defense?
Two things I'm keeping my eye on with the Buccaneers offense. The first is Todd Bowles. He's a defensive mind, one of the most conservative coaches when you look at his aggression index. Is he going to let Tom Brady and Byron Leftwich run the offense they want unimpeded, right? This has to remain a Tom Brady team with a pass-first identity. And there was this quote from Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times saying, Bowles will bring a commitment to the running game.
Yikes.
And then Stroud referenced the new contract for Leonard Fournette in the third-round draft capital spent on Rachaad White. You look at Bulls' time with the Jets, they were 27th in early down pass rate. However, I cannot fathom, after failing horrifically with the Jets, that Todd Bowles would be this blind and take the game away from Tom Brady in an offense that was number one in the league, gaining 76% of its total yards through the air, and was one of the most efficient early down passing teams. Second thing here, the interior of the Bucs offensive line. Let's see if they can hold up. Brady getting pressure in his face and being moved off his spots is typically when he does start to struggle a little bit. Pressure up the middle in general, right, is like the worst kind for a quarterback. And you have Tampa, who's going to trot out a rookie left guard in Luke Goedeke, who was playing in the MAC last year. And then you have a backup center in Robert Hainsey, who missed time during camp with an injury. So that's probably where you could see some potential for Dallas's defense to have an advantage. That's where I would be sending blitzes right up the middle. Let the rookie and the backup center be forced to communicate and handle that situation. I think really, though, why you need the ball in Tom's hand, aside from the absolute obvious, is just he's just got this ability, right? And this is what makes him so great, even though sometimes the attribute and the talent hasn't always been there, and people think that, he's going to fall by the wayside as he gets up there in age. He makes everyone around him better. You look last season, the O-line wasn't elite by any stretch, 19th in pass block win rate. Yet the O-line was first in adjusted sack rate allowed. And you're thinking, how could that be? Well, Brady had the second quickest release time. And that allowed Leftwich to keep the offense wide open and not be forced to using max protection. And I think that's the interesting part of this game is Tampa max protected at the lowest rate in the league, which just means more options in the pass game. And what's interesting here is the Cowboys faced the fifth easiest schedule of offenses last season. And now you're going to get the number one offense out of the chute with Tom Brady. And I think the best element you have as a defense is your pressure. And I think Brady's able to navigate that a little bit. And I think Brady's also got the ability to attack the Cowboys downfield. Don't be afraid, as we know at this point, to just go right at Trayvon Diggs. He may get you once every other week, but he is a liability in coverage. And that's the thing here is despite that weak schedule of offenses that Dallas faced last season, Cowboys actually finished bottom third of the league in deep pass defensive efficiency. Now, they were elite defending short passes, but you could really hurt Dallas pushing the ball downfield. And even with Dan Quinn, right, we gave him some crap to start the year, and we said, hey, if you're not going to change your style, you're going to be out of another job. Good for him. He did change his defense a little bit, played more quarters coverage than his typical cover three that we had grown accustomed to over the years. And then you look at some of the guys that he has, right? There's still some premium talent on Dallas's defense. Parsons, Lawrence, they have to be dominant here, right? You've got to make Brady uncomfortable to have a chance defensively. And that's certainly possible. They're both game records. But I think there's a possibility when Tampa does run it to keep Dallas honest, I think they can be successful in some of those spots. And that's kind of the area here where it's you go back to where Tampa is susceptible offensively. It's on the interior of the line. Do the Cowboys have those dudes in the middle, though? That seems where their defense is weakest, right? Neville Gallimore, Osa, and then you have Tristan Hill. Those are the top three defensive tackles in the Cowboys rotation. There's 156 defensive tackles in the NFL last season that played at least 150 snaps. Neville graded out 80th against the run, Osa 141st, and Tristan Hill 90th. I think you can run right at Dallas this year. I really believe that. Dallas also gave up 5 yards a carry on runs from 11 personnel. The Buccaneers lived in 3 wide sets on 68% of offensive snaps. They had a 61% success rate on runs from 11. Tampa was also one of the most efficient offenses running from shotgun. So it's fine if you're strategically running from good formations situationally. I fully believe that. You also look at some of the offensive weapons, right? It looks like Chris Godwin's going to play. Might not have the full complement of snaps, but he's back. Russell Gage, back. And so you add Julio to the mix. Mike Evans, healed from the hamstring injury. So it just feels like the offense is starting to trend in the right direction, even though if you asked us, 2.5 weeks ago where Tom Brady's not in camp and the receiving core is really banged up and offensive line guys are dropping like flies, the sentiment was, oh my God, Tampa's going to really struggle offensively. Now you look a couple days before the game, the vibe feels a little different.
Yeah, and part of the reason, obviously, you've seen Tampa take money and obviously the total tick up as well from its initial move to the under. Going back to the point you made about Mike McCarthy and trying to scheme up ways to get to Tom Brady, he wasn't shy about sharing that with reporters Monday from the Dallas team facility, basically saying when you have an old man at quarterback, you better bring pressure up the middle because if you come off the edge, he's seen everything and then some during his illustrious career. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but just wanted to try and reiterate your point that Mike McCarthy, well aware of the points that you raised as well, if this Dallas defense is going to have some success, a Dallas defense that he said can be as talented as some of the best units he ever had when he was head coach of the Green Bay Packers. Now, obviously, the other side of the ball just as fascinating, and it's going to look significantly different for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott comes into the season off a franchise record 37 touchdown passes last year, which had him tied for 4th in the league. Running back by committee, Ezekiel Elliott, yes, he's in the twilight of his career, but he still does lead the league in yards from scrimmage. Since entering the league back in 2016, he's flirting with the chance to go over 10,000 yards this season. Tony Pollard was one of the most explosive backs in the league when you look at his yards per touch. But the biggest change for the Cowboys comes in the receiver group, where CeeDee Lamb has to elevate and be a true number one. Michael Gallup, there is more optimism now than there would have been if we had this discussion 7 to 10 days ago about his availability. I'm still questioning if he'll be out there. But if Gallup can't go, it's essentially CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, and a couple of guys that have as many reps in the National Football League as you and I. When you're Dallas devising an offensive game plan, how do you go about attacking this Tampa defense?
When I think about this game, my mind immediately gravitates back to week 1 last season when Dallas traveled to Tampa. And we shouted to the heavens that the right game plan for Kellen Moore was to open it up and chuck because you can't run on Tampa. And you go back and look at the first half, the plan was perfect. Dallas went tempo to tire Tampa's pass rush out. 40 plays in the first half, 33 were passes, like pure perfection there. How does Dallas execute that plan now without Tyron Smith, Lael Collins, and Connor Williams protecting up front? How does Dallas execute that plan without Amari Cooper, Gallup, and Wilson in the pass game? And that's what makes me a little bit nervous here, because I have been hearing rumblings that if this were to get to 3, that there could be a buy order coming in on the Cowboys. The projected starting offensive line for Dallas is Tyler Smith, Connor McGovern, Tyler Bayadesh, Zach Martin, and Terrence Steele. Did sign Jason Peters on Labor Day. That gives him, roughly 6 days to potentially contribute here. But you got Shaq Barrett on the end going against a rookie in Tyler Smith. Barrett's the only player in the NFL with 3 consecutive seasons of at least 15% pressure rate on more than 400 pass rush snaps. So that's going to be a matchup nightmare. You're going to have to chip. You're going to have to help that side. The Buccaneers' run defense, I think, is going to be elite again when you pair Vita Vea with Akeem Hicks on the inside. That's just like a massive humanity, nearly 700 pounds between the two. You look at Akeem Hicks, 11% run stop rate for his career. If Dallas wants to run more in this game than the last time they played Tampa, it has to come from shotgun sets. You have to be able to disguise it. Dallas was actually more efficient running out of shotgun by a wide margin in terms of efficiency last season. Other aspect to think about in this matchup in terms of Dallas throwing it is we manually adjusted the Buccaneers secondary higher than the data would suggest. The secondary is now healthy. Tampa was forced to use 14 different starting secondary combinations last season. But once the Buccaneers secondary got healthy and Bowles could mix his coverages in and Tampa, could get back to their normal blitz rates, which Bowles does at an exponentially high rate, we saw an uptick in efficiency. So from roughly average the first 10 weeks in terms of EPA per pass allowed to top 5 in EPA per pass allowed the rest of the season. And we're starting this season with that finishing baseline. Depth appears to have improved with Jamal Dean winning the corner job opposite Carlton Davis. So you have Murphy Bunting, who's going to play plenty in the slot, but he's now your third corner. I think if there's one area, and you mentioned the man at the top, where Dallas should attack all night through the air, is every single snap, either Dalton Schultz or Tony Pollard has to be running a route that forces Devin White to be in coverage.
That's your boy.
So, Tampa was 21st in catch rate allowed to tight ends. Tony Pollard, we know, is just dynamic. 6.2 yards per touch last season. He can do it all out of the backfield, can line up in the slot. Every single passing snap has to feature Dalton Schultz or Tony Pollard attacking Devin White. That's really the one area that you have a matchup advantage through the air. Again, you mentioned the line on the total. when it was 52 and all the turmoil was hitting the fan with the Buccaneers, under got sent in, under 52.5, under 52. We then got to 50.5, and we saw a little bit of an uptick from another group that came in. This is going to be the Sunday night total. I'm not quite sure where we land, but 51 is a key number, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Again, I think if this does get to 3, and who knows if it hits the screen or if it comes in right at kickoff behind the scenes. But I think there is some potential there for Dallas +3 to come in at some point. Although, I got to tell you, Todd, kind of agree a little bit more as we see the matchup offensively for the Cowboys against this Buccaneers defense that's substantially healthier. I don't know if Dallas has the horses right now to execute the right game plan to beating Tampa. And on the other side of the ball, the injury situations to the offense aren't as bleak as we thought they were 3 weeks ago. I kind of almost agree with the Tampa move, -1 or a short in price in the money line, sending this out to 2.5 than I would with potentially taking Dallas back at 3. Very tough game, but that's kind of how my mindset is right now.
Let me tell you one thing I've learned over the years of betting against the New England Patriots when Tom Brady is at the helm, betting against Tom Brady during his 2 years so far in Tampa. When Tom plays with a chip on his shoulder and people have pried into his personal life and will question his decision to leave camp for whatever off-field issues he's been dealing with his family, you have to imagine he'll come in filled with piss and vinegar in this spot and try and shove it down everybody's throat. So Dallas better have a good game plan to slow down Tom Brady unless he has completely fallen off a cliff and isn't on the same page as a talented group of receivers that appears, to your point, to be a lot healthier now going into Sunday night than we would have thought about 7 to 10 days ago, figuring out who was going to be available. 5 games broken down as in-depth as we know how to do around these parts. And again, bettheboardcontest.com. Entries will be accepted up until Sunday's kickoff. So you happen to listen to this podcast on Friday or even Saturday, don't worry about it. You miss Thursday Night Football, you'll still have the opportunity to pick 5 games. Tell your friends, tell your family, get everybody involved. All sorts of cash and prizes right there. It's a way for us to show our appreciation for all of you guys, our loyal listeners, and for you, more importantly, to test your wits against some of the best handicappers that are out there. And Payne, as we always do around these parts, before we close up shop every single Thursday throughout the fall, we try and find one actionable element where we can send our viewers or listeners, as the case may be, to the window with what we'll call a positive expectation investment. What have you identified for week 1?
So as the loyalist of listeners know, we have the teaser that is pending for week 1.
Very good point.
The Vikings +8.5 to the 49ers -1. So that is still pending. That was given out on one of our preview series podcasts. There's a lot of movement in this market. I mean, it's pretty beaten up. But I will say this. I think there's one team here that's being a little bit mispriced. And, kind of going back to the very top of this podcast where I intimated it's probably smart to, take some notes as you're listening to this podcast. And there was one specific team that I discussed a couple months ago about not really loving the idea of going over their win total, but betting them potentially week to week. And we have seen some market movement on this team that's taken this game from 4 down to 2.5, which is the least surprising news ever because I do think they're going to be a bet on team. And that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, we're sitting at 2.5 now. We've gone through the key numbers of 3 and 4. I do think there's still value on Jacksonville in the first half +1. So that's kind of where I'm trending with the best bet here. When you look at Washington, this is a team that I think is a little bit overrated in the sense of defensively. I don't love the linebacker situation. We know Chase Young is out in this game. Offensively, not a huge Carson Wentz guy, and the last team that he played against was this very Jacksonville defense, so there is familiarity there. There's also a different vibe going around Jacksonville right now with Doug Peterson. The players have fully bought in. The offense is going to be sophisticated and smart, really forward thinking like we saw when the Eagles made their Super Bowl run. There's a lot of players on offense that have potential and ceilings that weren't touched last season. I think we're going to see huge growth from Trevor Lawrence here. And I think they come out of the gates fast. So I like Jacksonville still a little bit here, +1 in the first half.
Sometimes you have to reinvent the wheel and figure out what you can still find to extract a little bit of value on numbers that have been up for quite a period of time. The last thing that we ever want to do around these parts, and again, we reiterate it for the listeners that have been with us since 2014 and for those folks who are just finding us for the first time, we're not in this for action. We're in this to give you guys an edge, to give you a bet that you're not most likely going to get anywhere else at some of the best numbers, more importantly, that are widely available to give you a puncher's chance week in and week out, both on the college football side and the National Football League, to beat the sportsbook. So the Jacksonville Jaguars first half, take the one, don't take the half, shop around for the best number, make sure you've given yourself a variety of outs. We know just getting the best price is the laziest way that you can turn yourself into a better handicapper this football season. Having only one sportsbook to bet at is absolutely no excuse. Any other things that you would like to share, my friend? I'm not sure if the opening Thursday of the season is like Christmas Eve for you, if it's like Christmas Day, if you wait till Sunday, if you go full chicken wings. I'm not sure how it works at Payne Insider HQ for NFL Week 1.
I'm not sure how it works either. I am starving right now. It's about 11:31 Eastern Standard Time on Thursday. I have yet to eat, so I'm figuring out lunch. So I have no idea what's going to transpire a couple days from now leading into, the opening Sunday of NFL. Tonight's a nice little snack, though. With Buffalo and the Rams.
Hey, I don't say this in a negative manner, but once football season starts, every single day blends together from sunrise to sunset. We know what it takes to be successful in this business, and hopefully, as always, our listeners appreciate that. They'll reap the benefits, and it goes without saying as we embark on yet another journey through the National Football League. We appreciate all of you guys that have been with us right from the start, and we will continue to bring it every single week throughout the fall until they hand out that Lombardi Trophy in Glendale in the middle of February. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your Week 1 investments, and with a Jacksonville Jaguars first half +1 ticket in hand come Sunday afternoon. Hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.